our clients with the marketing and positioning of referendums here in Minnesota.
Fantastic. Thank you, Steph. I'm Jeff Dehler with Dehler PR. Dehler PR's mission statement is to improve communities through exceptional public relations, marketing, and strategic counsel. We've been around since 2011 and do a lot of referendum work, but a lot of other things for the public sector and for public schools, including communications planning and that sort of thing. Mr. Rapp.
I am Todd, Rapp with Rapp Strategies. Maybe I should just tell you that we're here as a group because Jake brought us all together about 3 months ago, and we did just kind of a little brainstorming session in my offices about, okay, so a referendum in trouble right now? Is there something wrong with the political climate? What kind of advice would we be willing to give? And the 5 of us and several others got together, and then we saw this opportunity here at this conference that maybe we should get all of us up on the stage together and we can talk a little bit about what we're seeing, at least in the referendum world, and what we think are important strategies. So it's fun to be up here with my longtime friend, Jeff, Steph, Jake, and Peter. Peter, it's all yours.
All right, and I'm Peter Leatherman of the Morris Leatherman Company. I don't do communication, I do public opinion research that feeds into the communications that these folks are going to share and strategies moving forward in 2025. And I thought for this that we would start out, and I kind of gave you a lay of the land on what Minnesotans are thinking right now when it comes to education funding and their own economic situation, and most especially property taxes. This survey, we just got it out of the field. It's one of the internal surveys that we do, and I share with all the different acronyms of education during the year. So you have an understanding at the macro level of what people are thinking. First off, what we saw, and as we talked about what brought us together, was with 40% of school districts passing referendums last year. In light of, it was a difficult time with the presidential race, did that impact it? And what we're finding is it didn't impact it as much as you would think. What impacted it impacted referendums and levies last year and the year before, first off, was the financial situation of the household. This question asks folks about their expenses and their income. Not what their income is, but how their expenses and income match up. We've been asking this question for almost 20 years. And the highest amount of financially stressed that we've had was going back to the start of the recession, 2008, 2009, where we got to 65% saying they were financially stressed. Just before the pandemic, in the halcyon days of 2019, we were at 26% financially stressed. Okay, in 2023, we actually got up to almost 60%, not at the point of the recession, but it was a major factor in 23. It's come down a bit. It is pretty stable now in the first quarter of 2025, with about 45% indicating they're financially stressed. So it's moving in the right direction, but it's still about 20 points higher back to when the economy was in a much better position in the last part of the last decade. And I always say with this one, the most important fact is the higher that number goes, it creates more people in your district that would support a referendum that can't afford it. That's the fundamental change in how this impacts people's behavior. If we go to the next slide, the other issue is property taxes. We're back now. Todd's been around politics long enough. Jeff has also the halcyon days of Phil Cranky and the Taxpayers League. In the late 90s, when property taxes exploded, they kind of abated in the first part of this century. But what happened in 23 was an explosion. People got, some of you have heard me present this before, but people got their property appraisal, and they saw, my gosh, my property's up 20-25%, this is fantastic. Well, very few people thought how that was going to impact their property taxes November 15th. And so we saw an explosion 2 years ago. We've seen it happen again. I have one client that did a survey last summer that had 52% say their taxes were high. In January this year, it was up to 70%. A 20-point jump in 6 months. So this is where we're at across the state of Minnesota. It's pretty consistent between the metro and the outstate. If we go to the next slide, What do they think how their property taxes have done over the past couple of years? Well, 56% said they've increased. 38% said they stayed the same. I actually found 3% of people that said they decreased. What we followed up, though, with those that increased is what's the primary cause of the property tax increase? Well, 24% said the school district, but 41% said their city and township, 28% said their county. Almost 70% are putting the focus on their property tax animus on the cities or counties. So this is good news for the school district. They're not blaming you, and it's very consistent with clients I work with, because we ask your perception of total taxes and then your perception of school taxes, and the perception of school taxes is lower. So they're blaming the cities and counties. That's wonderful. The bad news is, for the most part, cities and counties don't have to go to the property tax to the residents to approve a property tax increase. School districts have to. And so that's how this is impacting districts. By the time people go to the ballot in November, they've already heard about levy increases from the city or county. If we go to the next slide, this is where these folks are going to help, because we ask people on a 4-part scale, are they following what's happening in your local district and about the job the district's doing and getting you information? Well, first off, 30% say, I'm following and the district's doing a good job, primarily households with children. 12% say they're following and the district does a poor job of communicating. The problem is 58% either don't follow, they know it's available, but they're not paying attention, and 10% aren't even interested in what's happening in their local school district. This has doubled since the pandemic, because especially non-parents have not engaged back with local government like they did before. We see it in the results of city surveys and school district surveys. If we go to the next slide, you've heard me talk about the issue now 5 years out of the pandemic. We've moved on from masking and not masking, virtual versus in-person, all of that. The overarching concern is the quality of education in Minnesota's public schools. And so we asked folks over the past 3 years, trying to limit it. Don't think back to 2020, that's not even a fair comparison. Over the past 3 years, has it improved, declined, or stayed about the same? Put up the results for 2024 and 2025, we have an even tie, improvement versus decline. The issue, and we're hoping to see, in 2024, this went up almost 10 points, the number of people saying decline, and it did not go back down. So now we have a second point. We'll need a third point in 2026 to see, hopefully that's moving down, the decline, and the increase is, and the improved is moving up. The adequacy of funding of their local schools. Do they believe their local school district is adequately funded? It's unchanged between 24 and 25. For the most part, people are just terribly confused about education funding. What we found, historically, you go back to the Polini years. You had 45% say yes, 45% say no, because the Republicans would come out and say we gave all this money to education, and then the Democrats would come out and say it's not enough. Well, the Democrats have been in control of the governorship for so long, the governor comes out and says, hey, we gave all this money to education. The Republicans aren't going to say, hey, it's not enough. There's no foil. You folks are the foil now against what's happening at the state. And so people hear about all the money being given from the state of Minnesota, but then they see their local school districts making cuts, or neighboring school districts making cuts and going for referendum. People are really confused. This is a really growing concern at just a macro level in the state of Minnesota. And this question is, when you think of the property taxes you pay and the value of services you receive in the state, not just schools, across the board, we are now down to 57% saying that value is excellent or good. That's almost a 20-point drop over the last 4 years. What's changed? We don't see it so much in the quality of the services they're receiving. We're seeing it in the amount of taxes people think they're paying. That value proposition isn't there for the dollar anymore. The good news for school districts is if there's going to be a $100 property tax increase, what level of government do they want it to go to? Still their school district, 43%. The city, township, 17, county, 13. The none is double, the 23%, saying I don't want to give it to anybody, I don't have $100. But if they have a choice, they wanted to go to school districts. The problem over the last 2 years in a lot of your districts is the cities and townships and counties have taken that $100 before you can even ask the voters to approve it for the school district. So how has this impacted then in the last slide? People's support for a property tax increase. The statement is the schools are a good value, and I would support a property tax increase to protect that investment. The key on this is always the disagree. These are the core no, because we're not saying bond referendum, operating levy. We don't say $100 a month or $100 a year. Just in concept, are you for or against it? We're now up to the high we have, going back all the way to 2008, with 35% saying at the outset they're against a property tax increase. That makes it a difficult proposition. We were concerned last year when it got to 31%. We go over 30% just at the outset. It's a difficult environment for school district funding requests at this point in time. So that's the current lay of the land right now in the first quarter of 2025. As I know, a lot of you are planning for potential funding requests this November. So I think at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff to start the discussion on communications and strategies in this current environment.
Thank you, Peter. Isn't he just incredible? I just love listening to Peter because he has such great insights. We promised you 12 essential strategies. I get the first 4. You can probably figure out how we're going to divide it amongst the other 2. Start early, engage community members, strong communications effort, seek help. When you think about starting early, what does starting early mean to you? If you're going to run a November referendum, when would you want to start? Any people just throw something out there? Months or years? Now? All right, before November, yep, start now. Okay, that's good. Others? Any other thoughts?
After the last election.
After the last election? That's actually a really good thought. You're never not running for a referendum. That's just a horrible thing to think of. But it's true. At least a couple of years is what we're thinking. So you know, in many cases, in most cases, when you need to go out for a referendum. If you've got debt rolling off in 3 years, think about running a referendum so that your taxes remain stable, because it's a lot harder to pass a referendum to increase taxes than it is to keep them level. If you've got roofs that you know are going to be 25 years old in 5 years, you need new roofs, and those are probably too expensive for LTFM dollars to handle. So we're going to run a referendum to get our new roofs or our HVAC system or these major deferred maintenance items. If your enrollment is climbing, first of all, amazing, good for you. That's not happening for most of you, but yeah, you know that at some point you're going to need more space. The same is true for operating levies. When you think about any strategic initiatives that you are doing that need some funding to be able to support them, if you've got a declining enrollment, which is what is happening in most of our school districts right now, then think about, okay, how do I kind of support the programs that we have now, or am I right-sizing and reducing staff, and therefore I don't need additional revenue? Any other revenue or expense challenges. And so in most cases, you can spend a couple of years breaking in your community about what it is that is your situation before you get to the point of saying, okay, to address our situation, we're going to run a referendum. Sometimes there are exceptions, and I have GFW and Central Public Schools up here. GFW, I got a phone call from the superintendent who said, I'm starting July 1st. We have an August referendum, and it's June when he calls me. And he says, there's been no communication, can you help? In 45 days, we helped him pass a referendum. Don't do that. He was stuck. He had no choice. He had to do that. Okay, Steph. So if you're starting 2 years before the referendum, what are you going to do 2 years out? You're going to build some communications infrastructure. If you don't have stuff that you're communicating with community members now, get it. If you're feeling like senior citizens are not a part of who you're communicating with now, you need to be communicating with them. You need to develop a relationship with them. So do that, whether that's to develop maybe a direct mail newsletter to communicate with these folks, or at the very least developing those relationships by going and meeting with them on a regular basis is really important. And so think about your communities. What are the major kind of economic drivers, or what is the major group of people that live in your communities? If you're senior heavy, if you're ag heavy, if you're industry heavy, meet with those people because they're going to be important to you when it comes time for the election. And now you're communicating your situation. This is what we see coming out 2 years. Our roofs we're not going to be able to insure our roofs anymore because they're going to be so old that they're going to leak and they're not going to cover us anymore. And so we need this to be dealt with. We're not sure how we're going to do that yet. We're in a process now of deciding how we're going to do that. We'll go to the next one. So listening to your community is part of communication. It's a two-way street. We want to make sure that you've got the opportunity to hear from community members. And so how do you do that? There's Peter. Morris Leatherman does incredible, statistically valid scientific surveys that allows you to understand exactly where your community is at, not just parents, not just staff, but everybody. Surveys are important. But in addition to that, your staff are the first place that you should be going when you're talking about your situation. And you should be getting their input on how you should manage your situation. Because if you get their input, you've got a better shot of getting them to support you in that election in whatever way that might be. Whether that's just talking to people at parent-teacher conversations, or at the grocery store, standing in line, or getting them onto your Yes Committee. Staff is your first audience to be thinking about. It's really important to have some kind of committee or task force or something where you can deeply educate some community members who can then be your advocates and ambassadors later on when you get into the referendum marketing. Same thing with holding community meetings, getting out on the road and talking about this program to the Rotary clubs and the Kiwanis clubs and the JCs and the senior citizens and all that stuff. I think we can move forward, Steph. Telling your story, choosing impactful messengers, and then having conversations. Some of you may know a guy named Jim Meyer, who is the crusty old political operative at the Education Minnesota. He will come and advise your Yes Committee and provide some stuff. And having conversations is what wins referendums, is his mantra. And so, yes, the Yes Committee is going to have conversations, but you want superintendents to have conversations, you want school board members to have conversations, and if you can, again, recruit staff to have conversations, that's critical. You can read all the rest of these things. I'm going to focus on one more thing before I move on, and that is go where the people are. And it says St. James down there, and at that time, Becky Chalofsky was the superintendent, and she knew that senior citizens were getting a discount day at the grocery store on Wednesday. And so she set up a table in the foyer of the grocery store and just talked to senior citizens as they came in. And building that kind of goodwill is so important, but you got to know where they are and go find them because they're not coming to you. We hold a lot of, we offer the opportunity to have people come and talk to us at our schools. Not very many people will will do that anymore. They don't come to us, so we got to go to them. So the last thing is seek help, and what I mean by that is, why are you in this business? Think about that first. But no, seek help is both internally, your communities can help you. Man, if you get the mayor to say, yeah, this looks like a really good thing, people should support your school. If you get the Chamber of Commerce executive director to say the same thing, you're seeking help, and it's coming from local people that are third-party endorsers of your situation. That's a good thing. But at the same time, if you're running a referendum once every somewhere between 5 and 10 and 15 years or something like that, the expertise that you need to be able to run this might be found through a consultant. The amount of work that it takes to run a referendum, for those of you who have done this, you know that you've got to apologize to your spouse and say, I promise I will see you in 3 months. And we'll go on a trip or something. But do that, promise to your wife or your husband that you're going to go take them on a trip after the referendum. But there are people that can help. And some of them are here, there are others. Whoever it is that you use, seek their help. It's a really good thing. I think that's the last of my slides. So on to Steph, your turn.
Great, so I will be kind of piggybacking off of Jeff's slides as far as how to broaden your referendum strategy through digital tactics and supporting collateral within your campaign. So as Jeff touched on, you're always storytelling, and storytelling year-round is really essential for a successful referendum campaign. And that's just because it helps build broad support and early and ongoing throughout the campaign. So now is definitely a really great time for you to lean into your storytelling approach and make sure that you're sharing all of the wonderful things that are going on in your school community. Student stories, how successful your staff are contributing, and how you're keeping promises to your community through past referendums that they may have supported. So video storying in particular is definitely a powerful way for you to connect with your school community because it is a very emotional medium. It also offers a way to just kind of show the hearts and people who are behind your schools and the vibrancy and colorfulness of our kids who you're working so hard for. So this example here, there are two. This is from St. Cloud area schools. They launched this well before the referendum campaign, which is in 2 weeks here. It really was to help build a sense of pride, support enrollment and marketing initiatives for the district, and really helped pave the way for positive storytelling before they actually put a request on the ballot. So we don't have time to watch all of these videos today, but I'll give you a sense of the vibe here. And the charts are all in the app, so you can always go back and watch them when you have time.
Like nowhere else, a place of opportunity, of excellence, of access, like nowhere else. We are relevant, engaging, innovative, standing with our students, staff, and families, like nowhere else. With you every step of the way from 4K to graduation day, developing nurses and firefighters and chefs and artists and leaders, spaces to grow, places to dream, futures that beam, award-winning students, award-winning staff, Principal of the Year, Ms. Harkis, like nowhere else. Competing and succeeding, we work hard in class, on the field, on the court, on the track, on the stage, in the pool, in the gym, scoring goals, scoring runs, creating champions, in sports, in art, in life, like nowhere else. Challenging ourselves academically, creatively, personally, exploring passions, achieving, developing skills for college, for careers, in sustainable state-of-the-art climate champion facilities. Students learning, playing, growing, becoming their best selves, like nowhere else. Staff who have your back, believing everyone can succeed, can be heard, can make it in the real world. Celebrating, lifting each other up, like nowhere else. Digital tools, 21st century skills, writing code, writing novels, writing futures, writing songs, singing, playing, mixing, making music like nowhere else. Driven to school, driven to succeed, driven by each other to be the best we can be. Greenhouses, green screens, going green like nowhere else. growing lettuce, growing minds, growing the CEOs of tomorrow, serving meals, serving each other, serving our community like nowhere else, building houses, building connections, building futures, honoring our past, caring for each other, building relationships, moving together as a diverse community. This is what we do. This is who we are. This is the Sun Prairie experience. Every child, every day. This place is like nowhere else.
All right, so now that you've paved the way for a successful foundation for your referendum campaign, the next step is to launch your campaign, and that involves a lot of tactics to message to your community. As Peter often says, as he's working with school districts, an uninformed voter is typically a no voter. So it's really important as you're building your campaign and planning ahead to make sure that you're planning to use a variety of different sources, because we know that a mix of communication is how people are receiving their information in today's information world. So all four of us definitely recommend providing simple materials that are really clear, infographics, having a clean website, utilizing banners that may be outdoors or indoors where your parents and most likely voters can see the message, and also having some easy tools for you to use as you're out meeting with families and community members to guide them to where they can find more information about your particular request. And then another thing I just want to say on this is it definitely takes 7 times for a message to resonate with the average human. So that is just the value of making sure you're investing in lots of tactics when you plan for these campaigns. All right, and then as you plan for your referendum this year, we definitely recommend using digital strategies, particularly social media and podcasts, as a way to reach your most likely voters, which are often your parents and your staff, and younger voters who may be school-age students who are also of voting age and recent grads. So these platforms definitely help you spread information economically, because other than your time putting into social media posting, it is free to share and get your message out there. They're also, they make it very easy for parents and your residents to share the information as well. And we know through Peter's surveying that word of mouth is really critical to passing these campaigns. And so when you see your neighbor or another parent sharing your district's info, that goes a lot further than just it being posted on the district's wall. So this is an example from St. Cloud Schools that we just completed for their spring campaign here. We actually repurposed digital content from a presentation with Lori and Justin, and then spliced it into a bunch of different videos that can be shared across their social media platforms.
On April 8th, we're going to bring forward 2 questions to the voters. Question 1, being Apollo High School improvements, ask voters to approve upgrading Apollo High School to meet modern safety, accessibility, and educational standards. Question 2 focuses on indoor multi-purpose athletic facility. This space will provide our community with access to a full-size turf field and walking track, and will support year-round activities for students throughout the district. This is a year-round facility that would be open and climate controlled in the winter, but also provides opportunities in the summer and spring and fall for any time there'd be inclement weather for teams to be able to move their practices and be safely practicing inside. It is important to know that question 2 cannot be approved unless question 1 passes.
So when we take a look at question 1 and question 2, the total tax impact would be $3.33 a month.
Learn all you can about the upcoming referendum and be sure to vote on or before April 8th.
So again, that was a part of a 6-part social media clips based on their overall digital recording of their presentation. So it was very low cost as far as their time being involved, with high production from our awesome graphics team. So.
Putting on April 8th.
All right, and then finally, we definitely recommend at this time making sure you're educating your community about the complexities of school finance, especially before going forward for a referendum request, if you're facing one this fall or even this summer. So we have partnered with MASA to create this free school funding video that's available to you all to download. You can download it by taking a picture of the QR code or accessing our slide deck. It's available to you also to customize with your district's branding and adding any referendum information that you may need to if you are going out for a request this year for a pretty cost-effective rate. So with that, I'll play the video and then I'll hand it over to Todd.
After headlines across Minnesota declared record school funding in 2023, you may be asking yourself, why are so many school districts making budget cuts and going to voters for more funding? Here are the top reasons Minnesota schools are struggling to balance budgets. Number 1, inflation. Families aren't the only ones feeling the impact of rising costs. For school districts, the costs of labor, health insurance, property insurance, and school bus transportation continue to rise. The 2023 inflationary increase to the general education formula is a step forward, but it doesn't make up for decades of underfunding and failing to keep up with rising inflationary costs. Number 2, unfunded and underfunded mandates from the state. When it comes to some of the most costly things schools have to pay for, it's the state legislature, not the local school board, who makes these decisions. From implementing new instructional strategies to increasing curricular requirements to providing unemployment benefits, there are decisions made at the state level that local districts must follow. While the state may offer one-time funds to help pay for some new requirements, the ongoing costs are often the school district's responsibility. And number 3, the changing role of schools in our communities. The needs of students are different than they were 10, 20, or 30 plus years ago. From mental health support for students, specialized learning assistance, family resources, and career programs to help meet workforce needs, schools have taken on additional responsibilities to meet the needs of their students and community. When you add rising safety needs, aging buildings and technology, and declining birth rates, it's clear why Minnesota districts struggle to balance their budgets. School funding is complex, with the majority of funding coming through the state in the form of general education aid. Schools also receive funds for specific categories that can only be spent on certain items. Additional needs are then covered by property taxes. In other words, just because the state is providing us with more dollars doesn't mean we can use those dollars wherever we like. Each year, we tackle the challenge of balancing these funding sources with our increasing expenses to build an effective budget that meets student needs. When our student needs exceed state and local funding, we may seek additional support through a referendum. As you can see, there's more to the story beyond headlines of schools receiving record funding, inflation, unfunded mandates, and a changing role for schools. Funding schools is an investment in our students, community, and future. Please reach out to your elected officials and share your story so they can help do their part to make sure our students and our schools are receiving the resources they need for success. Visit our website to learn more.
I'm just going to pass it over to Todd so we have some Q&A time.
I don't want to cut off education about school funding. That's not good. So again, I'm Todd Rapp from Rapp Strategies, and I can tell you, because we all work together plenty, that we're all doing this because we're passionate about education, and that we've learned the hard way that districts really need affordably priced services to support them if they're going to go out for a referendum. The first superintendent I ever worked for was a guy named Ben Cannon, and at one point Ben stopped me in a conversation we were having, and he said, "Ben, you do know when superintendents go to school, we don't take classes in referenda or political strategy." And I've always tried to remember that 123 some referenda later, that you've got a job, which is to make sure that a school district is incredibly effective at educating. And now on top of that, they're asking you to beg for supper. And we're hoping we can help you with that in some ways. I've got the last 4, and those are the 4 essential strategies on the political side. We go to the next slide. The first is you need to know who your audience is. Now, I want to start by saying is that every district has the ethical responsibility to communicate with everybody, okay? And we tell districts that who we work with, Okay, you're communicating to the broadest possible audience. And in fact, if you want to build up the most trust, the credibility as you can, the way to do that is to even have the conversations with the people who are your strongest opponents. Not to endlessly argue, and I'll talk about that in a second, but to have the conversations. But it's important to know who your best supporters are. And if you're going out for an election in a special election time, such as the springtime, you need to know that the election pool can become dominated by people who are more likely to support you. And Peter can go through all of the data on this, but staff, parents, alumni, younger residents, those who attend school events, and those who already have faith in district decision making. Part of what you can do as a school district is to make sure your stakeholders are getting as much information as possible. And focusing as the campaign goes on, maybe one part for the community and 2 or 3 parts for your stakeholders is a pretty good ratio of how to get the information out there. Also remember, though, that you have other ambassadors, and we are well past the time when anybody finds one particular source of information to get money from. But we do know they listen to teachers. They do know they listen to alums, maybe. They listen to family and friends. You get information out there on issues that deal with money, and other people can share the word for you. But finally, just remember, no referendum passes with 100% of the vote. Do you want 90% of people to vote yes? Ask them to increase taxes by $1 a month. Oh, wait a second. Hinckley failed once for less than $1 a month, and that was too bad. And afterwards, guess who came forward and said, "Oh my God, we forgot a vote. We're so sorry." It was the staff. It was the parents who didn't come out. But ask for a very small amount. You'll do nothing for education, but you'll get 90% of the vote. You need to reach beyond the grasp of some people in the community who are never going to vote yes, and pick an amount that these audiences will support. Next slide. Second piece of political advice I would give you is you need to understand and manage the things you can control. Okay? There are some things you'll never be able to control, and I know we all went through in the fall of 2023, and Peter talked about it a little bit, an era of economic uncertainty that really affected some school districts with very good plans. Yet at that point, they just couldn't put them over the top. That wasn't something they could predict back in April or May when decisions had to be made. But think of the things you can control. Number one, how you developed your plan. Who you involved, how broadly you communicated it, how much you were listening. Second, you control the date. I cringe every time the superintendent says we're thinking about going out in May. Okay? In May is when parents are worried about kids' spring sports and graduations, and teachers are worried about just get me out of here, okay? I want to enjoy my summer vacation. May is a very difficult time to get the message out. But when superintendents talk with me about, say, November, about a number of years, my ears perk up. I get really interested at that point because one of the things we've seen over the last dozen or 15 years is there can be more success in those times, even if the last November of 2023 wasn't quite as good. The scope and price of the plan you can support. And guess what? Some school stakeholders are going to think you've got to go much bigger. And the message of, we've got to ask for everything we need. Hold on a second. You've got to ask for what a majority will vote for. And it's really important for you to be able to assess the landscape. Peter's got great tools to do that. There's other ways you can do that. And part of it's just listening a little bit more closely to what those folks in the middle are telling you. The number of questions on the ballot can be a successful strategy, or it can drag you down. I think there's ways for politically to use questions 2 or question 3 to help pass a first question or help create messaging around different issues. How and where you communicate, and then finally, whether people turn to you for answers to their questions. You do not want them going to the butcher or their pastor or their car mechanic to get answers. Questions about education. So when they ask you, get an answer out as quick as possible. Now, third, engage your teachers in building the plan. Jeff made a reference to Jim Meyer, who you call crusty, and that's a good description of Jim. I get a chance to travel other states, Jeff does too. I'll tell you right now, there's not a state that I know of that has a stronger support mechanism through the teachers union than Minnesota does. Education in Minnesota and St. Paul put literally hundreds of thousands of dollars into local referenda. And they only ask one question before they decide whether to go into your district. Were teachers involved in building the plan, and do they support it? That's all they want to know. The earlier you can get teachers involved, have good conversations with them, build the support, not tell them once the plan is basically decided by the school board what the plan's going to be, but get them around the table and being part of building the plan. The better chance you have that all of your teachers are going to step up and support the plan. In the world right now, it's just not enough to say, hey, we're going to go out and get some money, we need your help, and we expect you to be there. That's not enough. And I know when I'm talking to a group of superintendents, at a time when maybe some of you are deep in negotiations, and maybe the communication with the unions a little bit more stilted, I get the problem. But on the other hand, when you're in the middle of the fall, and the Vote Yes committee hasn't yet gotten done what really needs to be done, you can look back maybe at the time you didn't spend with your teachers working on a plan, and that may have been some of the best time you could have spent. Well, it sounds a little preachy, but you know what? It's just what I see out there right now. Finally, avoid the arguments. The opposition, thanks to Paul Dorr from Iowa, has a plan, and it's been shared around the internet through social media, and it's okay because a lot of opponents instinctively go there. You know what their job is? Get you off topic. They want you answering dozens and dozens of questions about the plan down to the smallest detail. They want you to talk about taxes, which I call the visiting field, instead of talking about education, and that's the home field. They want to distract you from going out and reaching the audiences that are most likely to vote yes, because quite frankly, about 25% of your district will never support any plan, even at that $1 level. And Peter's got all the data we need to prove that. But in addition, the Vote No's want you to share their messages for them, because they don't have these broad networks you do. But if you spend all your time out there arguing with the Vote No people, then you're sharing their messages. We'd rather you be sharing the messages of your teachers, of your community, and so on. The Vote No people want you to share their messages for them. You're the best tool that they have. In the end, everybody deserves information. Nobody deserves an argument. And so there's no reason for you to go back and forth on social media and respond to every little thing. Give them the information they need, and if they don't like it, you know that's one of the 25% who will never, ever vote for this. So one more slide we'll show you really quickly, and you can get a copy of these slides through MASA. You could also, there's in the back, there is a sheet of paper there with all of our contact information, a QR code, how you can get a copy of this slide presentation. But when we talk about 2 years before the election, we know that in the back of your mind, you're thinking about when the next referendum may have to happen. That's the nature of being a school administrator in Minnesota right now. So there's planning you can do all the way through. It doesn't mean you're in referendum mode 2 years out. It means you're thinking through this. Yeah, my advice to superintendents is that if you want to work on political strategy and start building out a strong communications plan, it really is at the 9-month area. I mean, that's when it needs to happen. And for those of you who don't have communications capacity on staff, obviously it becomes critical about that point. But if you think it's only a 4-month thing, that is, my board's finally made a decision, now I can start to communicate, you're already behind, unfortunately. So think about it in terms of a couple of years out, laying the groundwork, about 9 months out, start putting together the real plan for a referendum, and then by the time the board makes a decision, you're already in 3rd or 4th gear. And then you've got a real chance of passing. Peter, you got a few thoughts to end this?
Yeah, I'll wrap it up before we have to do a Q&A. What you've heard, we developed these strategies and working together over the years. And it really comes down to those that have done surveys with us in the past or are doing surveys this year. You know that there's a first part of our survey process that looks at the district atmospherics. That we look at trust in the district, the decision making, the financial stewardship, the involving the community, all of those things. These strategies, these communication strategies, when you're intentional, impact those atmospherics. Because the reason we ask those atmospherics is we want folks to walk in the voting booth on election day and make a simple cost-benefit analysis. what's being asked for and how much does it cost, and make the decision based on that. If they haven't gotten communication information from the district in 3 years, except for the last 6 weeks of the campaign, that's going to impact. You want to lay the foundation, and I think as Barb mentioned with Jeff's question, the next referendum starts the day after the last successful referendum. Not the one you failed, but the last successful. You have to be intentional planning. And yes, people don't pay attention. You know, your universe is never 100% to know exactly what it is. The other key factor to remember in building this, that you get to the political point and avoiding arguments, it's 50% plus one of those who vote. And so you really do have to take into account the strategy and be intentional about the vote yes and those efforts after. The key piece, and when you look at the social media aspects of the communication, we know since 2013, I can pinpoint it, where we saw it the first time, the Eden Prairie School District. Your most likely voter is your least likely, your most likely yes voter is your least likely voter in a special election, and that's a parent. Parents have not shown up for the last 12 years at the levels that they historically have. You need 80% of parents to pass a referendum. Before 2013, if you look at the database and the voter in a special election, if a district had 25% parents, parents should overrepresent by 10% in a special election. What we've seen since 2013, we're lucky if parents represent their actual percentage of the population. There are many districts. There was one district 2 years ago, overall turnout was 8%. And amongst parents were 18% of the school district. Parents showed up, 5% of parents showed up. And so this is a critical piece. So it's laying the foundation leading into it, but being cognitive of the process leading up in those last 12 weeks once the decision is made on the strategies in order to get your supporters to the polls. In almost every district, there are enough people to pass the referendum. So you don't have to argue. You do not have to go out and change people's minds. It becomes get the information and get your voters to the polls. And don't engage in those battles. So I think we left a few minutes for Q&A.
And I think we're all here for lunch too, right, Jeff? We're all here for lunch.
So anybody have any, sure, go ahead.
Yeah, with the getting parents to polls, have we seen better success with mail-in versus actually doing a general?
No. Mail is a very tough strategy in any place other than a district that has a lot of precincts that are naturally mail-in. But here's your problem. I mean, there tends to be a fairly strong relationship from distance from the school to whether or not you vote for something. The farther away you live from the school, the less likely you are to vote for it. And most of the mail-in precincts are a ways away from the core city. So, I mean, I'm waiting for a school district to really demonstrate we can do that well, and then we can start to figure out how to apply it. But you're far better off having one polling place very, very close to the school and getting people to come in there during a special election. That's my read.
Absolutely. Other questions?
So your timelines, impact of early voting, did those timelines integrate early voting, impact on that?
That's so critical. Everybody should always count on early voting as a really critical point, because you're taking away a barrier for a parent by offering them other opportunities to vote other than just election day. So 45 days, that's September 21st-ish this year, is when you can start early voting, and I would encourage parents and staff to vote early so that on Tuesday of election day, they're not, okay, the kid got sick and I just can't make it to the polls now. And offer extended times of when early voting is taking place. So a couple of Saturdays from maybe 10 a.m. to noon or something like that. A couple of times where if your polling place for early voting in a special election is in the school, then, and you've got an event happening at 7 o'clock, we're going to extend our hours of, from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. So that you can get people in the door and make it as easy as possible. So when you think about when are you communicating, you've got to hit the ground running for a November referendum as soon as parents and staff are paying attention about the third week of August, and get them some information so that if they start voting in the third week of September, they have some information and they know what they're voting on. So boy, early voting, great thing.
Can I have just one quick thing, because Jeff's advice is just really good. Buy some flowers or make some cookies for your county auditor. You develop these big plans for how you're going to do a special election, and the county looks at you and goes, yeah, that's not how we do it in these parts, okay? Get to know your county officials in charge of elections, because they'll help you get these kind of things done if you develop the relationship.
And I want to add on one thing too, for planning purposes. There's a reason we say 5 to 7 months formal board approval. There are many districts now, I've heard, they reach out and they say, okay, we're going to look at a referendum in November. I say, what's your timeline? And they say, well, we have to make a decision by August 15th, okay? Remember, August 15th, people start early voting September 21st. If you call the question, literally within 5 weeks, you're going to have people making a vote. And you're only going to have the kids in school, the parents back for the 2 weeks before then. You have to be intentional, you have to plan, you have to lay the groundwork. Please don't wait till August 15th. Even if the legislature, if we're shut down and we don't have a bill, don't wait till August 15th to hope that they're going to do something. Other questions?
Yeah, sorry if I missed this earlier, but the data presented, is that in regards to new referendums, or would the strategies be different if it was renewal?
That for a tech levy renewal,
Correct.
Since unless you're one of a few districts that's going to do an operating levy renewal, even though you don't have to. Not really. I mean, I think the communication still, you still lay it out, you still have the campaign. I don't think anything's a slam dunk anymore.
I know it was a high rate or capital project.
Yeah, I mean, I think only one has failed in the last 10 years, but the margins are getting closer.
We're at 97% success, but I'll tell you what, if you want to ensure that you can do it, the number one thing you have to do is show the community you spent the money like you promised. Show them what the value is for education. You do that, running a renewal can be a much simpler effort from a messaging standpoint. But if the community doesn't believe you've used that money well, you've probably got a problem.
I had a thing that popped up where someone said, okay, well, our community knows now that your board can renew your operating levy. So this is really a 20-year levy that you're asking us for, right? And we don't want to commit to 20 years. I'm like, oh crap. This is a great idea from the legislature to give us an opportunity to not have to go back to the voters, but now we've got some of our superintendents thinking we might only be able to run a 5-year operating levy because it's really a 10-year operating levy. And so we're starting to think, oh my gosh, we might have to change our strategy around what we're asking for, which is sort of exactly the opposite of the intent of the legislation. But if you can't pass it when people say that's a 20-year levy, then you've got to do what people are asking for and give them what they want.
So along those same lines, I think community members are getting more and more informed. The more the school districts are letting them know, especially now with the political, what's going on in the capital. So the local options revenue is obviously one they don't have much choice on.
Yeah.
But most of the districts in the state right now have $724 that they levy. And so both the House and the Senate have a bill out there that anywhere from $200 to $250. So as our community members, I think in the past, we didn't say anything about that, right? Because it was just there. Now, like we just went off for a $750 per pupil. We have $79 right now. And it failed in November. Now, let's say a $200 LOR gets passed. Our community knows about these bills now. So what strategy do we use to determine our amount?
On the list, folks, that number one, it has become transparency. Because if you don't tell your story, somebody else in the community will come up with a story which may not be accurate, and they'll get it out there, and then you're chasing. We've almost ended the day, I think, where you can put a levy on the books and not tell your community what you're doing. It just ends up being about a trust issue. And I've never seen very strong evidence to suggest that school boards that add levies don't have the opportunity to still increase taxes if they've got a plan that's high value, that promotes education, that's got broader community support. I don't think one excludes the other.
And I'll just add on a little bit where something that we all do is compare ourselves to others. And so, sure, you might have 724 LOR now, and we're going to add another 250, but if the next school district over has 1,800, per student, your challenge is that you're trying to be competitive with someone who's bringing in a lot more revenue. That may or may not work, and you might be the only one that's going to be asking for, in your area, for as much as you're asking for. So then it's about demonstrating the need. And one of the things that I saw when I first started doing these things was that I'd look at some of the materials that went out to promote the referendum, and we saw what we were going to do, but it didn't show why we were going to do it. So from the transparency perspective, start by talking about what's your situation and why you see this need. And as probably you all know this, but just as a reminder, if community members think that what you're asking for is kind of a luxury, they're not voting for it. If there's a clear need, then there's a better shot.
And I would double down on that too. And everything that we've seen in the data over the last 18 months is we're back to the recession of 2008, 2009. People will support have-to-haves. They're not going to support nice-to-haves. And like I have to tell school boards all the time, athletics is not a have-to-have at this point in time. When things are good, the economy's good, strong chance you can get those things through. You can do it as a second question strategy, as we talked about, but folks are very much into, there's a difference in the people's minds. The priority is going to be maintaining programs, class sizes. It's going to be avoiding future cuts, providing financial stability on the bonding side, it's safety, security, deferred maintenance, classroom space, especially tied to curriculum, like career tech ed, those sorts of things are highly valued. But you get down below that, you're going to have more of an issue, and you'll have more people coming up and saying, this is not necessarily a need, some of this is a want.